Yeah. What I really want to do here, as I was saying, is just sort of give an overall rundown of the play and narrative experience of this game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which has caused a big explosion, at least on Classics Twitter, if nowhere else. Although a lot of people have enjoyed it a great deal. It's released in 2018 to quite a lot of critical and commercial success. I wanted to give an idea of what it is to be engaged in this complex recreation of a historical world. And above all, of course, considering the nature of the series, to show how Herodotus consistently factors into this complex experience in more ways than one. So I intend to introduce and track the many guises and roles of Herodotus. The Herodotus takes rather upon your epic adventure, beginning with acting as a guide and then evolving from there into simultaneous roles as the story and the experience progresses. As I was saying before, it's not a kind of textual analysis thing either necessarily of the game and not the classical texts, although I will be referring, of course, to the histories. The idea here is to have some fun with it, I suppose, introduce you to this, something you might not know anything about or might know a little bit about. Though this is also an opportunity to see how creators of popular culture and receivers of popular culture, such as players who might well be encountering the ancient world, and certainly Herodotus here for the very first time, how they're going to come to get to know Herodotus and the world that this game suggests he lives in. The game itself is part of a much wider series of 12 main installments, starting from about 2007 to the present. Each game presents a different version of a different past world, so a fully realized virtual representation of a historical landscape that have so far included Crusades era Holy Land, Renaissance Italy, Revolution Paris, Victorian London, Hellenistic Egypt, and of course the topic here, the Greek world circa 431 BC, outbreak of Peloponnesian War. In each installment, then the player is going to get the opportunity to freely traverse these meticulously created landscapes, to meet famous individuals, initiate and complete stories, and to embark on an epic main narrative of action, conspiracy, and secret history. So, you let me know if the slides aren't working or whatever, but if they are, you see, wider narrative. There is a wider narrative that underpins the entire series, knits together each installment despite their chronological distance from one another. Overall, it's essentially a kind of complicated version of the good versus evil trope, but more accurately a reimagining of a sort of order versus chaos sort of motif. So it's said in the Assassin's Creed universe, within the kind of logic of the story, that there's an ever powerful faction of individuals who are hell-bent on seizing and maintaining power. So these are your principal villains, those who would control and murder and exploit. You are the hero, of course. You play a member of the opposition, colloquially known as the assassins, who seek to undermine this apparent 1% throughout history. And the assassins wish for freedom and liberty and all those wonderful things. So throughout the series, such famous and very real individuals have been linked to this fictional group of evil power grabbers. The British invaders of the Crusades, the Borgia family, capitalists of the British Empire, even Margaret Thatcher. Players operating as an assassin will get the help of other famous individuals: Machiavelli, Charles Dickens, Karl Marx, Vitruvius the architect. The list goes on. So Assassin's Creed Odyssey pretty much follows suit. It offers a massive open world version of Greece around 431 BC, and the player takes control of a protagonist called Cassandra. Naturally, since the player takes control of an assassin, her primary mode of interacting and impacting upon the world is through successful acts of violence against their enemies, of course. The nature of the play experience is one in which the player will undertake quests, so they will adopt a particular mission or role to complete that will involve helping oppressed townsfolk, assisting in the Athenian or Spartan war efforts, and in some cases changing or establishing the course of history. I realize how video game violence still comes across more broadly in media, I suppose, but even in just sort of the kind of common consciousness. But I would stress the necessity of not downplaying how enormous and rich and varied an Assassin's Creed virtual world really can be. You take a look here at the map of the Odyssey. Of course, it's not a life-size map of Greece, naturally, but it is available to you as a player to freely explore. It's been meticulously researched, lovingly crafted. You can tell when you're in it. It presents a very authentic feeling, and on occasions quite accurate virtual representation of the 5th century Greek world. So as I was saying, the sort of standard everyday play experience, I suppose, can be built into a basic framework. So the player with her hero Cassandra will take Cassandra to meet Brasidas at Sparta, for example. Brasidas will speak of problems here or problems there. He asks the player if she'll go to X place and kill, steal, or destroy object Y, person Y. The player will go and do that, and upon completing it will therefore complete a capsule of the wider narrative. So a kind of procedural thing in which you complete a story to create a larger story, basically. Most of the game is spent traversing this enormous world, though, actually exploring the thing, traveling over it. So the player has to travel overseas in her ship, or across land on foot or horseback. Might get a sense there in the top left if you're seeing that. Are we seeing that, Jan? Is that cool? Is that coming up pretty much immediately? Excellent. Isn't technology marvelous? You get a sense from here, the sort of scale of the world, showing a city that can be fully explored by the player there in the bottom center, and a surrounding countryside which she is also free to roam. And it's through this intrepid adventuring the player will discover locations, some open, some secrets. So let's say on her way to rendezvous with the 2 Spartan kings, as she will, to learn more about her kind of wider story, she might encounter a hunter or a blacksmith or a potter being harassed by local guards. She might hear tell of an enormous wolf taking residence in a nearby cave and be charged with the job of hunting it. One of my favorites is an hours-long chain of events that prompts the exploration of the tombs of heroes to uncover the secrets of ancient Mycenae. It does a very good job of giving that kind of, you know, the National Treasure film, so the Da Vinci Code sense of there being secrets beneath history. It's better than Da Vinci Code, let's be real. As you see in the bottom right, there's our first proper character there, Cleon. She might, as she probably will, help Cleon in the Athenian war effort. You might be able to see his suggestions there. Go and kill the Commander Nabis, destroy the supplies, and then return to me. Thus, you will have completed a capsule of the wider narrative. At the same time, she might choose to visit the more populous and equally meticulously reconstructed urban areas of Greece. You can visit the agora, see people engage in worship atop the Athenian Acropolis. Visit any and all towns and villages as well. It's not just the major cities. And thus you encounter this quite successful illusion that these are lived in places where people are just going about their business, farming, trading, hunting, engaging in various social, cultural pursuits. Now, I know you're all here for Herodotus. Before we move on, it is worth briefly mentioning how video games differ from other media, to give you a sense of, well, I suppose what you might call the problems that might come with such a colossal interactive experience that's replete with all these different possible avenues that you can take. So as you might have gathered, the player takes control of the hero who's undertaking an adventure against the power-mad villains threatening the liberty of Greece. And this, of course, within this world will necessitate an unprecedented level of control, basically, on behalf of the player. The player is the one who must propel the action. She has the freedom to explore Greece, to make actions that impact upon Greece. She has to confront this dauntingly enormous virtual world before she's able to engage in its many stories and experiences. So how the hell is she supposed to do that? How is she supposed to make sense of this massive world, its complicated story of unseen villainous forces, and its multiple branches of sub-narratives that populate ancient Greece? Enter your boy, Herodotus. As you'll see here, in terms of visual representation, the best analogy I could make is that he possesses some pretty strong Obi-Wan Kenobi vibes. So it makes sense that he'd be a little bit older, since the game is set in the post-Persian Wars that he's just written about, and takes place at the beginning of the Peloponnesian conflict. In terms of behavior, Herodotus is characterized as a slightly mysterious, but ultimately a very kind man. Hence the Obi-Wan analogy. We receive a bit more of this kind of Jedi Master atmosphere from him the more we kind of interact with him. He's an older gentleman, white beard, hood up. He's nonetheless approachable, and this is key. He's quick to become a friend of the player's hero. He's a nice bloke, basically. It makes sense to model him in this way, especially when you consider the Alec Guinness's other more ancient worldly role as Marcus Aurelius in the 1964 film The Fall of the Roman Empire, wherein Guinness has all these lengthy sequences pacing up and down his palace, pondering life's great mysteries. The point being, basically, that Herodotus in our world of Assassin's Creed Odyssey is in effect immediately one of the good guys, an especially helpful old man, replete with wisdom and experience. Sorry to move on again from Herodotus, I do apologize. We don't meet him immediately upon starting the game, though. That's the thing, that is in itself important. Herodotus is going to show up at a very pivotal time after the opening sequences. The sort of first few hours of play are establishing our very own character. It's Cassandra, up in the top right. She's a down-and-out Misthios, which is translated here to mean very directly a hired mercenary. The first few hours are going to see the player taking her around her home island of Kephallonia, fighting local gangsters, making friends with a sailor called Barnabas, and coming to discover the first rumblings of this mysterious, secretive conspiracy of power players that are known as the Cult of Cosmos. And then eventually Cassandra is prompted to leave Kephallonia for the great world outside. She's motivated personally by a desire to reconnect with her long-lost family, but will eventually, within this, gosh, we say something, 80-hour experience, she will find within this long narrative that her family and her ancestry are intimately connected with the machinations and goals of the cult itself. And upon leaving Kephallonia, she will go first to see the Oracle at Delphi, which is also a wonderful experience. You see at the bottom there, a recreated sanctuary. Barnabas, this is our new sailor friend, has just bumped into some old man here outside the temple and struck up a conversation with him. Now, the Delphic Oracle, it turns out, is under threat by these mysterious cult forces. The game leans into the common notion that the Oracle is a seat of political power as well as religious significance. It tells us that this terrible, unseen cult of nefarious conspirators is controlling the Oracle and forcing it to provide information to their benefit. Obviously, the world and the plot are a lot larger than I'd realized. We're going to need a guide. Thankfully, your man Barnabas has just met this old man. What we get at this point is an introduction to this old man, initiating a cutscene, which is a sequence out of the player's control, shown to her as a kind of mini-film that furthers the narrative. I'm going to see if this works. We have a video embedded within, and we're going to see how well this handles it. If you could just kind of thumbs up or something if you can hear it. Yeah, your audio on and everything. So thumbs up. Hold on, I've messed it right up.
Isn't this remarkable? We're so close to the gods, I can feel Apollo all around me. How does it go with it, Pino? We can talk later. This, just listen. He just saw the oracle. I couldn't help but ask if she's as glorious as they say. Is she? She left me with more questions than answers. That's the oracle for you. You weren't lying. Navas, use your head. He seemed interested in legends. Like you. I thought you might get along. How did... You know my spear just by looking at it? All things that be are more than they appear. Even I. My name is Herodotus. I'm a storyteller. Or I was. This war is forcing us all to new extremes.
I don't know how well that worked. However, this is your first instance in which you actually meet him. He seems like just any old bloke, so Cassandra asks who he is, and Herodotus utters his first words, just a simple pilgrim. Barnabas, ever the chatty fellow, reveals to us that he's accidentally let slip a few of our own personal motivations for being here. It's just that he seemed interested in legends. Of course he is, he's Herodotus. Eventually, Cassandra will come to realize you're more than some simple pilgrim, and then dramatically, all things in Delphi are more than they appear. Even I, draws back his hood. My name is Herodotus. I'm a storyteller, or I was. This war is forcing us all to new extremes. He goes on to say, I'm here on behalf of a man in Athens, a very powerful man. We intend to finally end this war. So Herodotus is swiftly characterized not as a historian, but as a storyteller, a weaver of tales. He's furthermore a peacemaker, a friend of a high-ranking official at Athens, who we will meet later, hoping to end the Peloponnesian War before it gains any more traction. This is always obviously a very dramatic introduction, but for the most part, the player is going to be interacting with Herodotus as a quest giver. So Herodotus is a non-playable character, someone you don't control. He's one of the many people who populate the virtual world, and he provides prompts for the player so that she can complete actions and therefore further the broader narrative. So the first thing here at Delphi, Herodotus is going to want you to do is find out about the cult's influence over the oracle, and if possible, free her from their villainous grasp. He will, however, also quite crucially provide the player with information that she would otherwise not know. He tells us, for example, that drawing blood in Delphi is considered an insult to Apollo. He thus provides the layman player with gameplay tips. Don't cause a fuss, go unseen. With, of course, an element from, I suppose, what you might call history. Herodotus, in these early introductory sequences, then, acts as a guide to the immediate world around us, so the complex politics of Delphi, and as a guide to our own methods of actually interacting with the world. Don't cause a fuss, go unseen. It's also worth noting here at Delphi in particular, that for all the infamous fanciful tales that Herodotus tells us in his histories, his character here in Odyssey is far more skeptical and much more rational. He's quick to say about the oracle, imagine what power one would have if they controlled what came out of her mouth. The extremely pious Barnabas is shocked to hear Herodotus say this. He says, oh, but Apollo controls this. Apollo controls the oracle. Herodotus in hand responds, of course he does. Almost as if Herodotus is not necessarily a believer in the gods. Herodotus will, of course, quickly realize that the cult seeks to control the oracle and thus to control the world. Now, his dealings with the oracle, it's interesting to note it isn't a million miles away, I suppose, from Herodotus' own reporting of, let's say, the bribing of the Pythia in Book 5, something that Plutarch many years later is going to have a serious problem with. Herodotus in text and game has no issues entertaining the notion that the oracle, incredible as she is also immortal, subject to mortal flaws. Now, in the game's context, Herodotus will act as an essential fulcrum for Cassandra and the player to pass the main conspiracy narrative surrounding the cult. Each time the player, through her actions as Cassandra, learns something new will return to Herodotus. So Herodotus will give her a task to do to find more things out, and then she'll return to Herodotus. And when she does, Herodotus will then elucidate further on what he knows about the cult, and then keeps sending Cassandra off back on a new quest to discover more. The one constant in all these actions that you take, at least here in these earlier sequences, is him. So what I'm pitting down basically is that with his knowledge of the real Greek world and of the fictional cult of cosmos that exists within it, Herodotus parcels out information. He's the pivot of the procedural narrative, the agent within the world that allows the main narrative to unfold episodically. He does more than this, though. He will actually come and join us on our ship. And from here on, Herodotus will remain aboard the ship as we adventure around. So he is a constant presence as well, someone you can actually chat with on the boat, madly enough. He will also occasionally depart with us when we complete certain pieces of the main narrative. So when something is especially important happens, he's going to come with us. As he's there up on the ship, now this is the ship that you control, and you're kind of going around the Aegean, exploring things and going to the right place to complete the right quest and such. He also becomes something of a straight up tour guide of the Aegean, especially when we first encounter areas and regions that are important to the Persian Wars. So sailing past Euboea and Athens, Herodotus will suddenly chime in. The Bay of Marathon is ahead. And Cassandra's like, Marathon? Herodotus, ever helpful, is, the battle where only a handful of Athenians pushed back the Persian invaders. Cassandra is evidently very unsure. The great Themistocles, he prompts. King Darius of Persia. Nothing. And Barnabas butts in, says, the site where the great Theseus slayed the vicious people. And Cassandra's like, oh, that Marathon. To which long-suffering Herodotus sighs, you're both hopeless. Got a bit of wit, does our virtual Herodotus. And he'll provide similar kind of characterful commentaries on specific regions, which will at once provide a kind of moment of comic relief, ordinarily, and entertainment, even as it educates to some extent both the player and apparently Cassandra. More so than providing facts, just simply providing facts, however, it helps to situate the player within the wider Greek world. He does, with his remarks, provide some sense of its history and therefore enrich this virtual landscape. It becomes richer, it becomes more full, the more time you spend listening to the guy, basically. He's especially excited to visit Crete. This, he says, is a place of great antiquity where the very ancient Minoans once lived. And of course, within the kind of logic of the game, small town islander Cassandra, who you play as, is unlikely to know anything about the Minoans. Consider how few layman players of the game are likely to know much about the Minoan culture either. So he's ever a significant anchor for the player's experience. So I have to say, it is quite difficult talking about games, especially when the game is this big and sort of thick with lore and it has this whole backstory over a decade in the making. But I imagine you get by now that an Assassin's Creed game, including this one, including Odyssey, involves the exploration of a reconstructed historical world to take down a fictional group of malevolent elites. Unfortunately, the story only gets more insane from here, because in the second installment, back in 2010, the franchise introduced a supernatural element. Throughout the games, the player is going to encounter remnants of an ancient alien race. These will appear frequently to the player in the guise of the Roman gods, confusingly enough. And they also act quite a lot like them, squabbling amongst one another and in lofty tones speaking down to your lowly human characters. Key thing to note here is with the apparent sort of alien gods is that it ties into that kind of popular culture motif of an ancient alien who influences human events. In short, for our purposes here in the Odyssey, it allows for a series of convenient explanations concerning Greek mythology. The gods were in fact aliens, and mythical creatures like the Minotaur were creations of theirs. So as hyper-realistic as this version of the historical Greek world is, the creators of the game obviously couldn't resist inputting some of these mythical elements. Bear with me, I've got some paper here. Here you are. Herodotus is one of the few people to have some knowledge of these mysterious beings and their long dead the civilization they come from. Herodotus is one of a very small number of people in the Greek world to actually know something about these sort of alien creatures. He's in the perfect position to possess this knowledge of long buried secrets. As he says himself, he's so widely traveled that fragments of these mysteries have found their way to him. As you see on the slide here, speaking to Cassandra, he says that in my travels I've heard whispers of an ancient civilization, a people who came before. They were not gods, but they lived for longer than any mortal and were far more intelligent. I've seen carvings in caves, strange symbols that suggest it was this ancient civilization that created humankind and gave them fire. Now Cassandra says, surely that was Prometheus who gave them fire. And Herodotus responds pithily, perhaps Zeus's eagle has been feasting on the wrong liver. So Herodotus is providing us with what he knows, and the player will choose most likely to pick up on those threads and in time come to encounter the very Minotaur itself, Medusa-like entities, a Cyclops, even come to discover the actual gates of Atlantis. So in the course of sort of drip feeding his information that he himself has discovered over his long and colourful life, and then allowing us to do the legwork to find out more about it, Herodotus is effectively rationalizing the myth. So he gives us an inkling that there's more to these mythical stories than meets the eye, and therefore he's the impetus for the player's own unraveling of the myths, which will eventually provide some shaky sort of science fictional, but ultimately true and material basis for the existence of gods and monsters. This ties in, if you think back to while we were in Delphi, we're insisting in Delphi that there's more to the Pythia than first appears, that there's a rational explanation as to the messages she's providing. So this at first seems kind of to be outside of a popular image of Herodotus, maybe the old Herodotus being a liar or a man of crazy tales of gold-digging ants and such. But I think it's pretty much concomitant with the Herodotean voice that you can locate in the history text. It's a Herodotus who provides his own opinion, who expresses his judgments, open about his disbelief concerning certain accounts. Although he's clear in that bit in Book 2 that his job is simply to record whatever I'm told by each of my sources, the rational Herodotus of the game and arguably of the text isn't a million miles away really from, I mean, there's Herodotus who's happy to reveal, I believe them, I do not believe that. Speeding through as ever, without going too far into it, the actual character development of Cassandra, our main character, is aided primarily through the theme of family. So the idea is that Cassandra was orphaned as a kid, and then she finds out her parents are still out there and thus goes to try and find them. And in doing that comes to unravel also the cult that's trying to kill them all. But the sort of life of Cassandra has been led principally by these older men and women. We first meet an older, quite silly character back on Kefalonia, where we begin the game experience. His name is Marcos. He's a kind of Del Boy type character who raised Cassandra to be a fighter and a thief. He's well-meaning and he's a fool. Shortly after leaving, he's not going to come with us, but we do meet Barnabas, who we saw before, who's another older man who will teach her how to sail. So as much as Cassandra is trying to kind of collapse the power of the cult and weave in and out of Athenian, Spartan conflict, she's trying to find her long-lost mother and father. And as she's doing that, she's making close connections with friendly, generous, older men and women of the Greek world to achieve this. What's more, by the time we recruit Herodotus to kind of accompany us and to teach us and guide us, the revelations that occur to Cassandra about her family throughout the narrative are done so also with the help of Herodotus. He'll help us to learn that Cassandra is of the bloodline of Leonidas, that Leonidas too was knowingly or not on the side of those fighting for freedom, that basically the bloodline to which Cassandra and Leonidas belong are destined to be locked into a struggle between tyrannical, dictatorial order and the freedom of chaos. But most interesting here is the relationship that finding all this out creates between Cassandra and Herodotus. It's always platonic. Nonetheless, there will materialize here a strong and close bond between them that will inevitably rub off on the player herself. Within the logic of the game, if you consider that without an in-game day going by, Cassandra is very quick to trust this innocuous-seeming Herodotus. She confides in him very quickly about what she's doing, about the cult of Cosmos, her own motivations, and he'll reciprocate in this by helping her to achieve her goals. In one sequence where the player takes Cassandra to Thermopylae to meet Herodotus before they sail off on their big adventure, Cassandra will vocalize that she trusts Herodotus. And it won't be the last time she demonstrates quite uncharacteristically her affection and her faith in him, and he is quick to respond in kind. Cassandra will eventually meet her long-lost father, a Spartan general called Nicolaus, but it doesn't go very well. There's a brief reconnection with her Spartan mother. Spoilers now, she dies towards the end. So her actual kind of rediscovery of her, Cassandra's rediscovery of her family isn't really all that great. And it stands in stark contrast to the ever-stable, always-present figure of Herodotus. The kindly old man, the gentle storyteller, wise man who teaches Cassandra about the complicated world of 5th century Greece. You might call him a father figure. I'm not entirely sure about that, but he certainly seems like he has a parental role between himself and Cassandra, our main hero. But of course, considering the fact that we control Cassandra and she is our kind of avatar for within the world, it is a relationship that you build with Herodotus too. Now, even like halfway through the game, we don't know exactly who these villains are. All we know is that there's a cult of powerful individuals profiteering from the war. And we know that people like Cassandra are fighting against them. There are protectors and freedom fighters and such. More answers are going to be found in Athens, as well as a series of very famous faces. Herodotus, again, will be the one who takes Cassandra to Athens, takes the player to Athens, accompanies her, and is ever by her side to help her make sense of the complexities of Athenian society. Our first stop here is at the Pnyx, where Herodotus will introduce us to the way things are done here. We see both Pericles and Cleon arguing their cases to the people in the bottom right. Then we go to see Pericles himself in private. He's a close friend of Herodotus, that ally he was speaking of before. Pericles is a pretty cool character. I think he's fair enough, true enough to Plutarch's characterization of him. He's a guy who obviously cares a great deal about Athens, but he's notoriously antisocial. It's his wife Aspasia, who appears to be a bit more plugged into society and culture here in Greece. You get to know them both as you play. And society here at Athens is everything. High society, it might be termed. One of the highlights of our visits to Athens is an invitation to a symposium at Pericles' house. Now, Cassandra doesn't want to go, but of course the player knows she must. So Herodotus makes clear that this is where you're going to meet his, and therefore your, potential allies in the fight against the bad guys. Attendees at the symposium, furthermore, will include several cultural figures of the 5th century, fully characterized, voice acted and everything. And some of them will become, like Herodotus, essential in your personal journey. Some of these people here at Pericles' Symposium include, at the top there, Euripides, Aristophanes, Sophocles. You will also find here Hermippos, Thrasymachus, Protagoras, on the bottom there, Alcibiades and Socrates. Herodotus is going to act as a kind of introduction, I suppose. He's going to introduce us to all these people. Later on, she's going to need to complete tasks for some of these figures. Alcibiades is probably the most interesting, as you might imagine. The player for Alcibiades is sent off to complete seemingly innocent tasks, which always end up more than they seem. Alcibiades seems like a fun-loving sex addict, which he is. But even as he's sort of playing around, messing about, there's always a sinister undercurrent to his character that suggests he's attempting to manipulate events for his own gain. Alcibiades is not a villain But he's not much of a hero either. Socrates is the most interesting down the bottom right there, the one who looks a bit like a cartoon bear. His provision of tasks for the player to complete force her to contemplate her in-game action. Socrates will actually engage in dialogue with you about the meaning of your actions in the game. Will you, for example, save the life of an innocent troublemaker by killing a guard? Should you catch the horse thief and hand them over to the authorities, or let him go because he and his family are desperately poor? Is it morally right to intervene in the ostracism of Anaxagoras, which you will do? So navigating this high society of 5th century Athens uncovers clues as to the player's next steps. And of course, as ever, all of this is facilitated by Herodotus, who provides character profiles of all these people, personal motivations of each historical figure. And by this point, he's a man that Cassandra describes in her own words as a friendly face in the dog-eat-dog world of Athenian politics. I give you all this detail of all these other characters here at Athens because it's indicative of a wider political situation that you and Herodotus are going to have to eventually get neck deep into. As you saw before, Cleon is here. I don't know about you, I think he looks an awful lot like Joffrey from Game of Thrones, and I think that's intended. He's set up unambiguously as the ruthless political rival of Pericles. It's no surprise that Cleon will later be revealed as one of those cultists attempting to wrest power of Athens. For now, though, Cleon is straightforwardly represented as a curiously modern kind of populist. He whips up the crowd against the elitists of Athens. Pericles, his friends, including Herodotus, fellow symposiasts, playwrights, philosophers, and experts. He accuses all these upper stratum of Athens getting fat off meat and wine while the rest of Athens goes hungry under the strain of war. This is to some extent true. We are hobnobbing with the nobility, the upper level of Athenian society. They might well be allies. They're to some extent heroes of these people, Herodotus and his friends at the Symposium and Pericles. Nonetheless, they are the privileged few. So is Cleon, of course. And we can't help but see this as a kind of 2018, as a kind of response to the current political situation. You have an electorate choosing between two rich, well-educated representatives, both claiming to work for the people. Might come as some shock, maybe not, to hear that Cleon, while speaking to a crowd of protesters in the game, will even promise to make Athens great again. Fun as all this is, of course, we're forced to ask a terrible question of our beloved Herodotus. Does not the evidence here suggest that Herodotus within this world is part of the dreaded and terrible liberal metropolitan elite that Stuart Lee so often warns us about? Nonetheless, of course, eventually the player is going to leave Athens, but it is going to factor in later in the game, as will all of our new friends. For now, it's enough to say that Herodotus has so far been an indispensable walking, talking guide. He's almost like a sidekick by this point for both the hero's character and the player themselves. Ultimately, the player is going to traverse the entirety of this recreated Greek world, uncovering and thwarting plots, killing cultists, saving lives. And it's all going to culminate in one final act that, for a significant part of it, takes place once again in Athens. The problem at Athens right now, towards the end of the game, is that the plague has happened. It's been represented in the game. Pericles is dead, and it's left Athens without a leader. So Cleon, who within the logic of the game is the one of the cultists, has taken control. What we need to do is instigate a plot to take Cleon down. So Herodotus suggests we all meet in Pericles' old house and start a rebellious movement. So while Herodotus might be a certain kind of liberal elite at Athens, he's also a freedom fighter. He's a revolutionary. How this works at the end of the game is that with knowledge that Cleon is the bad guy, what's known as the resistance forms. And this is composed here in the image of our hero, Cassandra, our body Barnabas, Herodotus, Socrates, Alcibiades, Aristophanes, and the bald guy there, Hippocrates. Each individual rebel around this table is going to give you a task by which to undermine Cleon's popularity. Socrates will send you off to steal evidence of his plans to hand Athens to the cult. And the date of Aristophanes' work is brought forward a little bit. He wants you to help him set up his Knights play to further discredit Cleon. Once you've done all these, as ever, these capsules of narratives to create a kind of larger story, Cleon is said to go to Amphipolis, of course, as a direct result of your resistance movements. Follow him there and kill him. This signifies more or less the end of the game. Eventually, Cassandra's going to rid the Greek world of the cult presence. She'll even discover that the head of the cult is not Cleon. It's not the miserable Archidamus. It doesn't, in some horrible twist of fate, turn out to be Herodotus. It's revealed to be Aspasia. The perfect candidate, I suppose, especially if let's say you're reading Plutarch's Life of Pericles, which when you're playing the game, you can tell the developers definitely did. She comes across to a modern reader as quite ambiguous. She's a strong, powerful woman of 5th century Greece, but also is rumored to be of ill repute, of course. It's worth noting, as I keep plugging away at, that Herodotus has been here the whole time. He's been very, very active, not a kind of wallflower, but as active as a character within a game that you don't control can be. When the game is finished and released, sometime after, the creators of the game released some extra material. This is material that the player can download, install, and then play in her own time. One of those extra sequences is all about Herodotus. It involves taking Herodotus back to the island of Samos, where he's said to have been living for much of his time, having received word that his parents have died. And we take Herodotus there, and he comes along with us into the thick of the action. We also learn more about Herodotus through a dramatized account of his early life in Halicarnassus. Herodotus characterizes those early years as life under the oppressive control of a Persian satrap. And that's why he fled to the freedom of Greece, the liberty of Greece, specifically Samos, in the logic of this game. We get embroiled invariably in a plot by the cult to take over Samos as a strategic point between Greece and Persia. Herodotus helps us to do this, and we overcome it, of course. The second extra sequence is the very last thing, the very last one. It's very simple, very straightforward. I'll be honest with you, strangely emotional. This final sort of miniature story, this little quest, is called Moving Forward, taking place at the very end of the game after all else is done. And it quite simply involves taking Herodotus to the Piraeus and at long last saying goodbye to him. I suppose it stands as evidence as to how important he is as a character, that there is an entire sort of bundle of material the player can download and enjoy in their own time to say goodbye to the character. My last playthrough of the game took around 120 hours. Now, if you're able to parcel off a couple of hours a day, that's 2 months, right? It's about 2 months you've spent sailing around with dear old Herodotus, getting to know the guy, listening to his stories. It'll come as no surprise that I'm sure players feel a genuine emotional connection with this kindly old gentleman. When you say goodbye to him, it's all authentic feeling, spirit of Herodity and wanderlust, where he proclaims his desire to travel. He wants to go to Greek Italy, where in the logic of this game, he never went to Fyri. He wants to go there now. While he's sad to depart his new best friend, Cassandra, Herodotus can't help but be excited. And this is the last we see of him when we say goodbye. We say goodbye to Herodotus, the guide, family member, rebel, and friend. It's undoubtedly a long labyrinthine experience, much like this talk, but shot through it all is our buddy Herodotus, true friend to the hero, an ally of the great and good of the Greek world, and a guide to the past and present of Greece. He began as a guide, a kindly old wise man who loves adventure and travel. He's loyal, he's gentle, ever willing to assist, but he's also quite strong. He will head this resistance against Cleon and thus help you in your goals. It's easy to see then how Herodotus might come to act as a kind of substitute parental figure for this almost orphaned protagonist, who, like the player, is both alone and out of her depth. I would argue this virtual Herodotus gives that same warm, comfy feeling that a modern reader will feel when she settles down to entertain herself with tales of his histories. His characterization, as you see, will evolve into various sort of roles at once. Parallel to the voice of Herodotus, you might see in the histories his virtual counterparts, a constant questioner of meanings, the point where he ultimately provides the motivation for a discovery of scientific rather than mythical alien presences and apparent monsters. In this world, Herodotus the traveller is endlessly open-minded, having lived a life of rich multicultural experience. Although we might well be concerned that Herodotus is hobnobbing on the wrong side of the populist conflict in Athens, Herodotus does fall easily and immediately onto the side of right, onto the side of good against evil. I hope you would agree that, having heard all that while all that happens around this virtual Herodotus is, of course, a work of fiction, there's something quite pleasing and occasionally strangely authentic feeling about the Herodotus of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Thank you very much.